Hi students, I'm going to go ahead and just give you an Aquinas overview. It's one of those things that is kind of hard to do. My face just got really big. I'm trying a new computer. It's one of those things that's really hard to do, but I think that it's worthwhile. Aquinas is really kind of oddly constructed to many people. That's not to say he is odd, but that, I find him challenging to read. To sort of flesh things out, this is how things go. He's going to start with a question. And normally, the statement that's expressed as a question has a traditional answer of yes. Okay, and then Thomas then will go through and present several reasons that the philosophers have for saying no to the question. And they're serious questions that are what I guess you might call the toughest points of attack. He'll then go ahead and cite a traditional authority who will have a supporting answer of yes. And he'll begin with, on the contrary, okay, sed contra in Latin. And then he presents his answer to the question, saying, I answer that, or respondeo, okay? And he'll reply to the objections one by one. I actually think the easiest way to handle this is to read the question, then read the sed contra and respondeo, and then go through and read each objection one by one, and read the corresponding response before you move on to the next objection. I think this is the best way to do this. I think if you do it that way, you'll be more, I guess, aware of what the content actually is. So moving on, Aquinas is really seen as somebody who fuses together traditions that people thought were impossible to fuse. In the medieval era, Thomas has he has this great teacher named Albert Magnus, who also becomes a saint. And one thing he makes Aquinas do is become acquainted with the texts of Aristotle, primarily as conveyed by the interpreters who were Islamic. Averroes comes up, and the Islamic tradition preserved a lot of the Aristotelian tradition that then the West took up again, because for a while the Catholic Church was very hostile to Aristotle, and there are still some Christian churches that are. Now, because he becomes acquainted with these texts, and because he also knows the Bible well, and Augustine quite well, and through Augustine, I think you pick up this Platonic influence too. He is able to synthesize things in a way that no one thought was possible. One thing that you don't realize, probably because it's not so well known, is that he received his degree under armed guard. Because while it's true that his advisor taught him to go to these ancient texts, or rather these Islamic texts that preserved an ancient text, it's also the case that it was very dangerous for him to do that. there were many people in the college that he was in and in the church itself who were very worried about him doing this. They did not think it was good. And they thought that it would lead to major issues and perhaps to the loss of faith. Now, what is the problem with Aristotle? The problem with Aristotle, most primarily, is that Aristotle says that the world is eternal, which means it was never created. So not just that God has no beginning, right? God, infinite, eternal, right? This is something that most Orthodox Christians believe. But the universes and the world, right? So this would kind of rule out Genesis. And I guess there are some other reasons that he's not, seen too keenly in that period of time, but that's primarily it. So one thing I want you to do is to look at Aquinas as this great synthesizer. Nowadays, I think we kind of look at different traditions and think they're incommensurable. And Aquinas was in a similar position where they were saying it is incommensurable to reconcile St. Paul and even Augustine, who is seen as being closer to St. Paul at the time, and the influence of Plato there. Then what he will do is to say, no, I think it can be done. And one of the most important reasons that he can do this is because he has a particular way of thinking about rationality. And it's not that far from how Augustine thinks of it in a theological sense, but maybe in a philosophical sense it is a bit different. So let's talk about that for a little bit. This is how he maps out the human soul, okay? So Plato's going to say you have the rational part, the spirited part, and the appetitive part. Aristotle splits things up between rational and irrational. And then within those divisions, he subdivides again between calculative and scientific reasoning and vegetative and appetitive. Okay, and Augustine is interesting because the soul is associated with reason, and the whole body kind of integrates reason, emotion, and desire to be resurrected at the end of life. Thomas is going to kind of draw on all of this, right? He's going to say, look, we have a rational faculty, which we apprehend the good, particularly the good, through our minds. But, this is interesting, he also calls mind will. Will, right? And remember, Augustine's really the one who kind of brings us this concept of the will. The sensitive and the appetitive faculty is how we learn about the good via our senses. Okay, right, so reason inclines us toward the good through our minds, right, which is also the will. And the senses, the appetite, lead us to the good through eyesight, smell, taste, everything, right? The rational faculty is divided into speculative reason and prudence, okay? Speculative reason is what Aristotle called scientific, theoretical reason. Reason about things that are always true, that cannot be other than they are. And then prudence is what Aristotle calls calculative reason, or practical reason. It's our capacity to reach choices based on deliberation and contingent truths. Things, in other words, that can be other than they are. Then he divides our sensitive, appetitive faculty into what he calls the irascible and the concupiscible. The irascible is like your feelings. If you feel anger, shame, fear, concupiscible, which comes out of concupiscence, which basically means like kind of an inclination toward lust, desire, basically, not just sexual lust, hunger, thirst, sexual lust, all that's concupiscible. And like the ones before him, he thinks that reason should govern appetite. But he, as a Christian and as a heir of Paul and Augustine, is going to say reason should govern appetite, but we find that this is difficult to do because of the fall, because of sin. Another reason I think that Aquinas is really important in the history of political thought is that he spells things out that Aristotle leaves underdeveloped. And there are many reasons Aristotle might have left them underdeveloped, one being that these might just be lecture notes. But what you see is kind of fleshing out. And so MacIntyre actually says that the best interpreter of Aristotle is Aquinas. Though they differ in important ways, a lot of the points that Aristotle doesn't connect, or that he kind of just quickly describes, Aristotle, kind of gives us the bones, and Aquinas, in some places, fleshes them out. Another reason that he's important, and this is the last reason that he's important, I think, in the history of political thought, is because he basically explains everything. And this may just be my personal place, my personal opinion. But in my opinion, I think he is the most comprehensive of all philosophers. He is able to explain things and systematize things in a way that nobody has done since him, and in my opinion, even before him. People who are not religious often look to Aquinas as kind of this model of clarity and thought, even if they reject some of his basic premises. So when you're starting out what you're reading, what is your definition of law? Think about that, and then think about what he says. And basically what you see in question 90 is a spelling out, a breaking down of the following definition. Law is an ordinance of reason for the common good made by him who has care of the community and promulgated. And you're going to see that if any of those elements are missing, it is not a law, okay? It is not a law. So you can go to each part of the definition, an ordinance of reason for the common good made by him who has care of the community and promulgated. And for example, say the Nazis, when they made law, which of those four, or maybe there's more than one, did they violate? It's also the case, that I want to give you some background before you kind of launch into this, that there's a hierarchy of law for Aquinas. And this is actually one of the things I find most compelling about what he wrote. And this idea pops up again in the letter from a Birmingham jail. It's something that you'll see, I think, in influencing a couple of things. So eternal law is at the top, right? And then you have natural law and divine law, okay? They come from eternal law, okay? Now, human law descends from that, okay? Human law descends from that. Now, just to kind of briefly go through things, and then I'll let you go. Eternal law, that's the principles that God has used to govern the universe. He governs all created things by divine reason. And the law is eternal, right? Because God exists outside of space and time. We only know the eternal law and its reflections. If you go back to the Republic, remember the person that looks at when they get out of the cave, they look into the reflection of themselves in the pool of water. Okay, that's how we know the eternal law. Okay, if we looked at it directly, it would blind us. All laws derive their authority from the eternal law. And so this means that all laws are rational. So if someone says something's a law, but it's not in accord with right reason, it's not going to be a law. Now, natural law is a particular reflection of the eternal law. And actually, very interesting, you'll see in question 91 that Aquinas says that the eternal law is in the very structure of the created rational mind. The structure of the created rational mind. And the structure of that mind itself directs us to our natural good, okay, our natural good. It constitutes the structure of all moral knowledge, and it's just there. It's structurally there. By being human, right, we are inclined this way. The divine law is the reflection of the eternal law, and we know it through revelation. Revelation being the Bible for him, revelation being the incarnation, and the way that you know the divine law is through faith in Christ, and you're directed toward reconciliation with God. That is kind of the point of the divine law. Law, whether we're talking about divine or human, directs us to our end. Remember, Aristotle talks about the end, the telos, okay? Our final end, our most end is eternal happiness. This is beyond the scope of natural law. Okay, this is also beyond the scope of just our rational faculty. Natural law for him is only going to direct us to our natural good. Do you see that your natural good and your divine good will go hand in hand? So human reason, though, is faulty in a way that revelation can't be. Now, human law is a detailed application of the natural law to the circumstances of particular societies. Okay, and it's going to have all four elements that we talked about. Human law is something that when you're reading, you want to kind of see how it's related to, okay, let me just give this example. If you say that stopping at a red light is a part of the natural law, are you right or wrong? You're wrong. It may be deriving from some more complete understandings of order and cooperation. But the thing is, we could have a purple light that told us to stop. We could have a pink light that told us to stop. We could have a glittery light that told us to stop. And all that can change. All that can be contingent. And so actually, there's quite a number of human arrangements that you might say are in accord with the natural law. Now, sin complicates this whole portrait. It's going to complicate everything, because it will impede our ability to know these laws. There are, however, and this is where I'll end, basic fundamental principles that we can't not know. They can never be lost from us. And this will come up actually more when you read for next week. But I want to bring them up now. Your speculative reason will never be able to escape the fact. We'll always know somehow this is the first principle, it can't be erased, that the same thing cannot be affirmed and denied at the same time. Basically, the principle of non-contradiction. The first principle of practical reason or practical wisdom, and therefore the first precept of natural law, is good is to be done and pursued, and evil is to be avoided. Do good and avoid evil. Do good and avoid evil. You see how underdetermined that is. All right, and we're going to get more into the specifics of that later. Have a good